Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out to the Warrant Committee. I see we have a couple of guests in the audience tonight. And just to go over the agenda a little bit, we're going to talk about contingent versus non-contingent budget scenarios tonight, and hopefully come to a consensus on whether or not we want to endorse an override budget for the warrant. And under non-contingent scenarios, there's a few questions that we have to process through in terms of what we want to do about fixing some gaps that are in the non-contingent as well as free cash. And then we're going to move into a discussion about articles. We can at least take up the noise article this evening. And we're not going to be able to vote individual non-contingent budgets tonight because Julia and I have been working on getting, and Ted actually created a spreadsheet for Julia, getting the warrant to a place where we could put the warrant on the screen and vote down article by article. So my hope is that we can start that process on Wednesday and we can discuss each budget as we go. And then we at least have an orderly fashion to march along, and we'll know which ones we have voted and haven't. And then we'll probably finish it next Monday night, the voting. Questions or concerns about that process? Could I get a volunteer to turn down the TV in the other room so I can't hear myself talking? Oh, you muted it? Thanks very much. Great. All right, so I sent out 2 copies of minutes, and I can put up on the screen what the dates were unless, March 7th and 9th. Could I have a motion on those?
Make a motion that we accept the minutes for March 7th and 9th as presented.
Second.
Thanks, Betty. Thank you as well. Any discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Great, thanks very much. All right, so why don't we move into a discussion about to contingent or not to contingent. And for everyone's edification, I'll share with you that I've received 10-ish phone calls from different people, more than 10 phone calls if you start adding them up. Pretty much unanimous in advising that this is probably not the year for a contingent budget. I didn't hear anything on the phone that I didn't hear last week in person, but just stressing a couple of points like, will it poison the well if we go out this year and ask for a contingent budget and then we need to go again in a year or two later? Because if it fails when we go for an advancement override, does that then use up some political capital that we would have needed to pass an advancement plus an operational override a year or two later? And I think that that's a good point. There was also the point that the schools and the Board of Selectmen were not enthusiastically endorsing. They pretty much said that they would respect our decision, which isn't a ringing endorsement. And so that's a concern as well. And there was just sort of a malaise on my phone for a couple of days. So I wanted to throw it out there and see what you folks thought. Nobody told me I couldn't do it or that we would be an embarrassment if we did. It was just, please, think about this carefully, which I think we were going to do anyway. I think I will share with you where I am personally. I personally think that we've carried the contingent flag really far. I think we did a lot of good work, which can be a foundation for a contingent budget next year. But I feel like without strong, enthusiastic backing of the school committee and the Board of Selectmen, that we're kind of out there on our own marching. And unless we saw a dire emergency, I don't know that we want to be out there as an island on our own as the Warrant Committee. But I want to hear from you because it's going to be a good decision. It would be different if we were having to make tons of cuts and for some reason the Board of Selectmen and the school committee weren't agreeing with us that we needed to protect those cuts. But that's not the case. We were talking about an advancement budget. And it's a very different scenario. So that's my personal thought, and I'd love to hear what others think, and if you think that this is the year for another year of trying to get by with a non-contingent or not. Yes, Steve?
Well,
Michael.
there's some things that were in the contingent budget that I think we really should consider that it's money well spent. Full-day kindergarten, for example. It's like you put in $150,000 and you get back almost $1 million. And I haven't had a chance to find out about the streets, but I would hate it if there were some streets that were going to be extended for a long time and we couldn't get to them because we didn't have enough money in the road budget. I don't know what the answer is to that, but there were probably some things that we were for that were a good idea to do. And I just would hate to cut off our nose to spite our face because we didn't think a small override was good. We could. That's my thought.
I want everybody to speak, but you reminded me of an announcement I wanted to make on roads, and that is I wanted to put in everybody's head that there is a $300,000 delta on the capital request that was for storm drains and is now for something else. And the capital committee is meeting on Friday morning to discuss what that $300,000 could be recommended to go towards. And two ideas that I heard were roads and a roof. So we might be getting a request from the capital committee on Friday afternoon that would satisfy that. And I meant to say that up front. A roof. So others.
So it would be 300,000 for the roofs, or $3,000
There's
from the
300
700,000?
There's $300,000 for the capital committee to try to reallocate.
And we might get some of that for the roofs.
Of bonded expense,
Oh, okay,
okay, not free cash.
okay.
We have to talk, so we're gonna need
Okay.
participation tonight. You're biding your time? Yeah, but Brian?
I'll just say my opinion has kind of evolved. I would say when we first started, I was fully on board for an override, and I think part of it is my newness to this process,
Who
to
got
municipal
you?
government.
Just kidding.
But I think you mentioned carrying the flag, and the Warrant Committee carrying the flag. I think it's because we're the closest to the situation. We sit here over 20-plus nights and listen to individual people scraping by with their budgets and talking about ways they can improve the town. And the one comment that was said was there's no fluff in the contingent request. And that stuck with me. There was nothing that anyone put out there, with maybe a handful of exceptions, that was fluff. Even that, to me, felt like it was restoring things that were cut last year,
Yeah.
or just trying to get by and provide a baseline of service that's a little better than what's out there now. But I will say, and part of it is just being, like I said, new to the process and getting informed opinions of folks who've been here before. If there's not overwhelming support, and there's not, I don't think we're charged, people like to say we're charged to do X. We are charged to do what's right by the town, and I don't think fighting an uphill battle is necessarily right, but I think I've just had a better informed perspective that if jobs are not at stake this year, that we're not making that they're going to be operational suffering, then I understand. My opinion has evolved. I will say that I think looking at it in a one-year lens is a little tenuous, because if you look at it with a two-year lens, it's my understanding we made a lot of cuts last year with the promise of an override as a backdrop this year. If that's the case, I think that's fine. But I really would say, to your point, I hope we leverage this exercise that we've gone through this year to understand that next year is going to be serious, because that would be 2 years in a row now that we will have said, just by, hold off, wait till next year. That would be 2 years in a row, and I think that's dangerous. But I do agree that right now in the short term, my opinion has changed.
Okay. Anyone want to go before Darnell goes?
Please, quick.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is a difficult situation. I've thought for the last 3 years that next year was going to be the override year. And, we've managed to bump along. I loved, Brian, your point from a couple weeks ago that, if you have to make an investment every now and then in the community, and if you want to go forward and improve the situation, and we're overdue for that in many ways. We're not leaving full-day kindergarten necessarily, throwing that under the bus, because we do still have a $950,000 chunk reserved in the non-contingent budget from free cash. Our problem is the 150. Mike?
Well,
Right.
it would be very.
So it's still a problem, but we haven't thrown it under the bus yet. So I don't know. I don't think that there's any point in going forward with a non-contingent budget at this point. Contingent budget effort at this point, because it is late in the game. there's not a lot of enthusiasm anywhere, and you know, next year we presumably won't have a $700,000 February budget item that's going to determine the fate of an override. If it hadn't been for that, I think we would have been pressing ahead, because 700,000 would have entailed many cuts. Actually, it was more like 510,000 out of the contingent budget. So I kind of thought when I got on the warrant committee 5 years ago that I'd go through this process, but maybe not. So.
You could always come back. Okay. Others? You ready?
I'll take one shot at this whole thing. And, my opinion hasn't changed about does this town need an override and everything. It hasn't changed because the situations that we brought forward really 3 years ago structurally are still here. I mean, you know, Brian was like, you know, the will of the people to do what's right. We knew what's right is taking care of the system, doing what we said, upholding some of the promises we made last year to these schools, departments, and the different departments around town about, guys, hang out with us for one more year and we'll stand up for you next year and tell the town what's needed to be done. And to say we didn't go through any cuts, go through every department in this town and ask them if there's been any cuts. Go through the school department, go through the police, go through the fire, and ask them if there hasn't been any cuts made in their departments over the last 3 years and what they're living with. So that we have lost, you know, we have lost. And it's not like, oh, we don't have 10 teachers on the, you know, the block this year, so that's why we shouldn't go out and do what's right for this town. You know, we spoke about roads in this town. They're not getting any better. And I guarantee you, ask a majority of people in this town, would they like their roads to be worked on in the next 5 years? Most of them will stand up and say, yeah, heck yeah. Tell them what it takes to get that done. We had a 5-year projection done for this town. That's our 5-year plan. That 5-year plan that we had put out there told us that we're minimum $6 million short, probably closer to 13, and that's not including any capital. Now, Tom, you're here. Am I right with those numbers that was presented to us as a town?
That sound right.
You know what I'm saying? So if those are if that's the reality of where we are right now, how can we sit back and say, oh, because we're not threatening the loss of personnel this year, those numbers don't matter? I mean, honestly, those numbers don't matter. And we weren't even trying, with this piece of an override, we weren't even trying to address those numbers. We were just trying to get to a point where we take some of the pressure off the schools, the fire, the police, and the other departments throughout this town. And maybe give back something to the town so that they can continue to enjoy what they love about Milton. So it's more than just, let's get to a point where we're losing personnel that makes sense to go with and go through an override. Another thing, this town, and I think we should get over it, we're not going to be able to commercialize ourselves to prosperity, okay? We're not gonna be able to get enough commercial tax dollars no matter what we do if we build commercial spots on every piece of property in this land, in this town that's free. We're still not gonna build enough of a commercial base so we don't have to go through overrides. This town is an override town. We maintain our high ratings, credit ratings across, because we do pass overrides and take care of the town itself through that process. That hasn't changed. Been here 23 years. That hasn't changed. So now going into will probably be the 8th year without any type of real operational structural override. to clean up what's been going on, we sit here and we say, well, there's not going to be any political will to get out there and do anything. I'm not worried about it. I'm worried about tell the people what's going on, let them make a decision. And if you let them make the decision, if they say no, fine, they spoke. That was their voice. So when we go back out and it's now not 3 million or whatever it is, they'll have to make the choices. Do we risk our schools going back into receivership because we didn't spend enough on them, because there's not going to be enough money there? Are we going to risk, our police cutting back on the number of bodies out there because, strategically we can basically say we have enough police just to make the force, even though we're down, I guess, 2 police officers and up 2,000 people? Police chief told you that. We're talking about rolling, closing fire departments now across the town because we don't have the money to meet overtime budgets. We've heard all this. Matter of fact, we've been on TV, so a lot of the town has heard all of this stuff. Okay? It wasn't in a vacuum. So as we sit here and we say, well, hey, you know what? I don't think there's political will. Why not go through this process? I think us going through the process, even bringing light to this process, is very important, because we as a committee are here to basically state what we think is the best thing for the town, not what the best thing is to feel good for whoever or group of people. Now, the town could say no, and they got every right. Town meeting could say, we don't think it's time, and that's great. But our recommendation as a committee, I think, should be what we think the town needs going forward. And they can say no, fine. They said no, but that's what I think this committee. And it might not get supported by the Board of Selectmen at this time. It might not get supported by the schools at this time. But that doesn't change what I think this board for the last 2 years, 3 years have been talking about this town needs to do. And I think we should just present it. And if they say no, they say no, fine. If the selectmen don't want to put it out to a ballot or vote, that's fine. But we say as a committee, because that's what, as a watchdog group, we should say what we think this town needs. Yes, the town needs money for roads. Yes, we need an all-day kindergarten. Yes, we need money to help maintain the quality of education that we have. Yes, we need additional police on the street. We need these things. Yes, we need firefighters. We need these things. Yes, we need to support and help continue to grow our library, which is doing incredible things for the community here in Milton. And it can't keep doing it if we don't take care of it. So yes, there's a number of things out there that this override or this potential override would have affected, even though we didn't have traditional job loss items on the table this year. We already gave up the jobs the last couple of years. This year we were supposed to go back and get those jobs for the people. That's it. For these departments. Help these people out. We can stand aside and say, hey, you know what? Not this year, we'll push it off next year, and next year there'll be another excuse. Oh, people don't want, nobody ever's gonna wanna raise their taxes. Nobody's ever gonna wanna say, hey, here, let's raise my taxes. But you have to present the argument.
I'll come back to you again, but there's just a lot of points in there that I wanted to try to address. One of them is, there'll always be an excuse. I do want to point out that a lot of people pointed out to me, and we pointed out when we met with the schools in the high school, that this was a really unusual year in that we had a $2 million surprise, essentially, in the January-February timeframe. So, not just stormwater, there was a bunch of stuff that came in higher than expected that kind of took the wind out of an override sales, unfortunately. But I completely agree with your point that it's our responsibility to tell the town what we need and what we heard, and we can still do that without voting to support an override in the warrant. We can write the warrant and say exactly the process that we went through, the needs that we determined, and that we didn't see support, and that the citizens are going to have to support it next year. And the thing that really turned me around from being very supportive of the override more than a week ago to where I am today is what you said earlier about the numbers don't seem to matter. I think the numbers in that 5-year plan do matter. And I think that it's highly likely that we're going to need an override soonish to meet operating losses. And if we don't have the political will to go out for that override for those operating losses, then the town's in real trouble. So I kind of think we need to wait.
Well, that's, to me, is reverse thinking. Because you said we have a $6 million, let me just use this low line, the low number. We have a $6 million deficit now. Okay? That's what we're saying. And we're not really addressing or trying to address the $6 million deficit. What we were trying to do is basically give life back to all of these different departments and parts of the town that have been starving over the last 5 years or so.
Yep.
If we don't acknowledge that there is this structural problem going on in the way we're financing everything throughout the town, and say, okay, we're going to wait until this operational budget has to be passed, then there's not going to be political will, because it's going to be really needing probably $6-7 million, but nobody's ever going to go for that. We're going to go for what? $3 million.
Yeah.
At that time. We have not learned anything from this process. We haven't learned anything from this process. So you got to bite the bullet, take some chunk out of the apple today, and you got to take some chunk out of the apple 2 years probably from now, just to get us going in the right direction. And that's what my problem is with the whole thing. We're not thinking about climbing out of this hole that we're in. We're just thinking about, well, we'll survive at the bottom of the pit, even though we're standing on quicksand.
Yep.
And that's why my opinion of do we need to override has not changed.
Yep.
It hasn't changed. But, now you said, well, Darnell, if you look at the political climate and everything, do you think it's going to be an uphill battle? Do you think it'll be tough? Yes, I understand that. I 100% understand that. But the thing is, it doesn't change the charge of this committee to make good recommendations to the town. And whether the town heeds that recommendation or not, that's town meeting and for other boards and other people to do. It's like, Lee Michael, I say your house is burning. Lee Michael, you should leave and, let the firemen take care of that bill. Lee Michael decides to stay in that house. Lee Michael is burnt down in the house. Guess what? He had good information at the time. He just made bad decisions, and sometimes that happens. But we have to at least make sure the folks out there have the good information. I'm not trying to burn your house. I'm just giving you an idea, an example. But you understand that.
Yep. Others, I want to hear from everyone. Jean.
All right, so I agree with everything that you say. And the last sentence is the one that gives me the most problem, is who makes this presentation? How does it get out there? It's late. People don't know this. The town knows it. The employees know it. The people involved in the town, the committees, etc., they know it. The fire department knows it. The police department knows it. The school department knows it. But when you consider it was 27,000 people in Milton, that's a lot of people to educate. And I don't know how we do that right now. Not everybody is going to pay, not everyone is going to be represented at town hall. Not everybody. And so that's my problem. How do we get it out there, and how do we, as a town, if we can't do it as a town, we can't do it.
Yep, darn.
it's, whenever you do an override,
Mhm.
and that's do anything in this town, it's one more yes vote than a no vote.
Yes.
Okay? That's anything in this town. That's what it is. It's one more yes vote than a no vote. So you educate as many people throughout the town as you can about these exact same things. And if you ask, you know, members of the town who have kids who are going through sports, if there's an opportunity to help cut some of those sport fees, get your children back into sciences, get your kids back into these, you know, different organizations without having to pay an arm and a leg. That's a little piece of your butt.
That's huge.
You know what I'm saying? We have, you know, kids in town who are going to be losing reading programs right now, basically. Is it something that's important to you that your kids have that available? Is it important that we have, you know, more officers on the street? Another block. So,
I think that we know your point.
no, I'm not saying, what I'm saying is, it's like, she asked, how do you do this? What you do is you educate as many people as you can, and you get one more vote.
How many,
Then
how many
that's not-
newspapers come out between now and,
Every week. So, I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's what you do. That's how you do it. That's how overrides have been run in this town from the beginning. That's how you do it.
Others? Ted, do you have your hand up?
I do. I am concerned that next year, in spite of the growth in revenue and things like that that we had this year, that we will be looking at an operational shortfall. Just looking ahead and estimating the numbers, I think we could ease, now I know I've said this before, okay, but I know we could easily, and I just handed it out a couple of weeks, you weren't here, don't know, but we're probably looking at the first structural bite of that 6 million that was forecast next year, because we didn't feel it this year. And you are going, if you put through this advancement budget, which is much needed, you are also going to need another one next year for $700 million.
1,000.
700,000.
I don't think I can support a $700 million override.
oh, yes,
So
I'm moving.
so you're going to need that, and that's when you know, will the town pass 2 in a row? I don't know.
That's basically.
I've always thought that the intelligent town passes an override before they absolutely need one. You know, and this would be a perfect case for that, but I don't know that they will.
Yes, Darnell? I just,
No, I'm
Sure.
just quick. Ted, you asked that same question. Then you say, will they pass that one next year? Well, we're talking about one this year. Do you bake that into next year? That number into next year.
Right. It's gonna be
And that's,
bigger.
and that's
It'll be
what I'm
bigger.
saying. So I'm saying, so that's what you do. That's what, as a committee, we do. We look at what the town needs, and you do that. You say that.
and right now,
That's what it is.
3.7 next year, to me, seems more likely to pass than 3 this year and 0.7 next year.
So, oh.
On top of the stormwater
figure out
this
what's
year.
going on this year. Yeah, so.
I wanna hear from others,
Other
too.
people can go ahead, you know. I'll set my piece.
Yes, Phil?
There's a lot to talk about. We last passed an override 7 years ago, in June of 2009, which, if you remember, was after the collapse of the housing bubble. Stock market had already crashed. People were terrified. Who would have thought that we could pass an override in that environment? But we did, and we did because we were looking at literally dozens of layoffs in the school department. We were looking at 4 or more cuts in public service, public safety. The police department told us they would have to cut patrols in order to meet that budget. DPW was looking at 2 or 3 and there were other consolidations and cuts in almost every town budget in the community. And we went out and we passed a $3.4 million override by about 4 or 5 percentage points, if I remember correctly. After a campaign that incorporated dozens of people, that raised many thousands of dollars in order to get that message out, that involved door-to-door leafleting and drops, and a tremendous effort by every department head in this community to pass that override. And that was the largest override that we had ever passed. We're told that this year's proposed override has been described as an opportunity override. And I can understand why, because there are some things that we're asking for that don't represent cuts necessarily. So they represent an opportunity that we have to increase services that we haven't had before. But I don't think that's an accurate description of the overall override. Because without this override, we're going to face the continual degradation of our roads. We're spending about a third today of what it takes, or what it would take to get our roads up to a decent level over a period of many years. We have a police department that has, I think, fairly evident needs to meet its mission in a community that has not only a larger population, but that has a larger population of nonprofits, like at Curry College, has an expanded hospital that has expanded needs, and that since in the last 6 or 8 years has assumed a tremendous amount of responsibility for providing security at all of our public schools, which involves a commitment of manpower and time and effort at the administrative level. And in the schools, although we're not facing any layoffs, we are still allowing athletic fees and activity fees for the students that are among the highest in the region, and that prevent some of those youngsters from participating in events that every other high school student participates in. So there are some cuts here, in a sense. There are some real needs that are not being met. So it's not just an opportunity to meet a portion of your road needs, or an opportunity to maybe reduce somewhat the burden on your students for playing a sport or being involved in an activity. It's not just an opportunity to allow your police department, which has come under criticism for not providing enough enforcement, traffic enforcement in the town, or parking enforcement in the town. These are not opportunities, these are needs that are going unmet under our current funding, and that citizens need to understand. So when we come here as a group to decide what we're going to do, we're a finance committee, and I think that primarily our purpose is to inform the community on what we think is needed financially. But we also are a representative body, and we represent the citizens of the town. That's what a finance committee has always been in the history of this state, is to be representatives of the community. So we also have to represent, when we hear it, the political views of those people who we're going to be asking to go out and vote on an override. If we vote an override that we know has little chance to succeed, and the town meeting for some reason supports it or doesn't, or the selectmen support it and put it on the ballot, and we lose, we will be facing the first operational override that this town has ever lost. And we will have put our stamp of approval on that override. And I think that in doing so, we will have sacrificed some of the credibility that the town has long placed in this board. And I think that would be a terrible mistake. I think a lot of people have made very good points about our responsibility to provide a warning to the town about the things that we're not doing. That's why I object to calling it an opportunity override. These are not opportunities, these are necessities. And I think that even if we vote not to support an override, our message to town meeting and the town warrant ought to be very explicit about some of the things that we considered as reasons for an override, and why they need to begin to think more broadly about an override in terms of things other than just we're losing lots of personnel. If we go another 5 or 10 years without beginning to address our roads, these roads are going to be impossible. They're just going to be terrible. And if we continue to not address the need for additional staffing in the police department, not just cuts, but additional staffing, then we're going to see an erosion in police protection, and particularly in those areas where people want them, like traffic control and parking control. So I hope that we can do that, but I think that we are at this point where we would do more harm to our credibility to recommend an override at this point than we would do good by recommending one.
Thanks. Jonathan, Betty, Chuck?
There's been some discussion about what this committee's charge is, and I agree with most of what would be said, but I would, what has been said, but I would also add that we're not obliged to pursue lost causes, and I don't think there's any chance. We've heard directly from the selectmen, somewhat indirectly from the school committee, simply isn't the enthusiasm to get this through. And given those circumstances, I don't see what it adds for us to go to town meeting and then perhaps to the voters with forcing people to take positions that they're not perhaps ready to take. It is an educational process to get an override through. You're asking people to put money out, and never an easy sell. Even when the needs are clear, as they were in the last one. And Phil said 6 points, 6-point victory.
4 to 6 points.
So even in a
4,546 approved, 3,948 against. Okay, so
Better than you thought.
give me a second.
And that was at a time when when we were talking about numerous layoffs. We're not in that position now. I would strongly recommend, however, that we not let the issue drop. And I gather from comments that you made, Lee Michael, that your intention to use the commentary to bring it to the people's attention. I would suggest very strong language. We can't. We're not gonna be able to maintain what we have unless we have additional revenues. That's a simple fact of life. But again, I can't see the point of going either to town meeting or, in the off chance of town meeting to approve it, to the electorate before that case is made, and unless all hands are pulling at the same time. Again, I don't think we're obliged to pursue lost causes. And I agree with Phil that doing so this year would endanger the credibility of the committee. And I think that would be a terrible loss to the town.
Thanks. Over here, Chuck?
I don't remember the 2009 override, but the override that comes to mind to me that gives me great pause is the one last year for the firefighter, which I think by all accounts everyone supported. It was a bit of a no-brainer, but if you looked at the results of that, it was a lot closer than at least I thought that would be a much bigger vote yes than actually occurred. So I think there is a strong no override position out there, and I think we've kind of gotten our override with the stormwater fee. I mean, I think that moved very quickly. I supported it 100%, but that came together very quickly, and I think that is a tremendous benefit that we could prevent an override, but that is going to be a burden to citizens in the town. I'd also like to remind the committee, and I think this is a big deal, not only can we fund just about all the contingent budgets, but we're using no free cash to do that. And we used quite a bit last year. So going cold turkey on free cash, I think, is a pretty significant achievement in a budget year, just going from one year to the next. So I continue, to echo what people said and to continue not to support this year, but I know we'll probably have to go for an override in the coming years, but this doesn't really seem the year to go for it.
Well, I'm listening to everyone's thoughts. I think everything that we have on this list is needed, essential. And to Chuck's point, I've been around and worked on a lot of overrides over the years. And I remember the one that sticks out so much in terms of the no vote was when we had 90% reimbursement from the state for schools. If I remember correctly, the people who voted no were 1,600 people who voted no. So even with 90%, you still have that group of people that no matter what will vote no.
100%, I wonder.
Probably they'd vote no because they wouldn't believe that was real. But the only thing I would say is that the educational process town-wide, and the people who are televising us will be laughing when I say this, is I'm really glad now that the Warrant Committee is televised, even though I wasn't too happy last year, because the people are tuning in. People tell me that they watch this meeting, and I think that's maybe part of what we can do to help educate people. But it can't just come from the Warrant Committee. I am a political junkie who watches the selectmen's meetings pretty regularly. I watch planning board pretty regularly. And I didn't see much discussion from the Board of Selectmen this year on the override until the last couple of weeks. I was sort of waiting and hoping that it would begin to have a discussion way earlier. So if there is sincerity about wanting to get ready for an override next year, then we need to begin in September, when people begin to tune in and listen and talk about it and bring in department heads to the Board of Selectmen's meetings, as well as other opportunities for them to discuss their budget and their needs and what makes their budget issues unique. So I will, go along with not voting for an override this year, and hopefully we can work to support one, a good one next year.
I'll ask in a minute if anybody else has anything else to add, and then I'm going to ask if anybody in the audience, we have at least one selectman, Anne Marie's here, Jack's here from the fire department, Glenn's here from the schools. I'll ask if they have any comments, and then I'd like to call for a vote. I'd like to know how this committee wants to move forward, if we want to pursue a contingent budget and keep building that, or if we want to focus our attention on a non-contingent budget scenario. So we'll have a few minutes to think that through. Yeah, Mike?
I just wanted to I heard from Ted about the $300,000 for the roads and the bonding, so
Yep.
that might be taken care of. But the $150,000
Okay.
for the schools,
So
where's that coming from?
There's some thought on how to do that. The school committee is going to meet on Wednesday, and I'm hoping that they're going to take this up for a vote. But you heard when we were here at the table last week that there was the potential for some energy savings at the schools that they could put towards that $150K. It seems as though the energy savings next year would equal about $75,000, which leaves them approximately $75,000 short of the $150K needed for full-day kindergarten. I think we could find $50,000 for them in the non-contingent budget, realized by some savings on the Blue Hills School. So we would move funding from one school initiative to another school initiative if the Warrant Committee found that to be an appropriate move, which would leave them just $25,000 shy of the $150K. I traded some emails with Mike Zulis this week and asked him if he would go back and ask his board if they could find that $25,000 by reprioritizing their spending and turning over every rock, and he said that he would go back and talk to them. I feel pretty confident that in a budget of $40+ million, in order to accept $1 million in funding from us, that they will find $25,000 in operating funds. And seems like Glenn agrees that that might be possible, given the shaking of his head, the nodding of his head. Okay, so there are, go ahead, Jean.
Very short.
Yeah.
Because of what Phil said that made me feel really awful. is that it's pivotal to one child to be deprived of getting on a school bus, getting in a school program, or not being monitored by a specialist. You can't put a value on what is that child is not, just one child, is not going to get this year. And it falls upon all of us to be concerned about that one child. And I understand the process has been delayed this year. I understand we were a little behind in proposing that budget. Therefore, these children are now left behind another year. And we are impacting the future of children's lives seriously by not being aggressive enough. And I think that it's just a lesson learned, but it will be at some child's expense, and it bothers me. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. I wrote it down. I'll include it in the warrant. Let me ask, there are folks in the audience, Tom or Anne Marie or Jack, do you have anything you want to say? Glenn?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think a couple of things. I mean, I think the warrant committee has taken the right approach. I don't think there is the appetite this year for an override. And I do agree that there are a lot of things that we're giving up by not going for an override this year that are, have quite a bit of merit and are needed. That being said, we're embarking on the next few years of some really interesting revenue growth opportunities that I don't think we've seen in a while. I mean, we've got either 55 or 37 units coming on at Henry's in the next year or so, and we know that's going to happen eventually. Believe me, it's getting closer. It really is getting closer. We've got the KC Farm thing, which I think is 75 to 100 units going in there. We've got Pulte potentially with 23 units. We've got the 36 or 37 units going up at St. Pius. There is a lot of growth coming through, and that's a lot of revenue. I mean, we don't know exactly what that number is yet, but there is some significant revenue that's going to help. And as some of that stuff, we've also got a master plan committee coming on board to try and push forward some of those changes that were recommended by the master plan. And hopefully some of those things, I think it was Donnell that said it, our commercial areas aren't going to grow a lot in terms of size, but could they improve a lot? Yes. Could they get redeveloped eventually? Yeah. Yeah, that can happen. But we need to just basically get the right atmosphere to allow that to happen. And support as best we can the infrastructure and everything for that kind of growth to occur. The amount of we're talking to Joe Prondak at our last senior management meeting, and said the building application permit fees are still going great guns, and a lot of that is people are the tear downs and rebuilds are really starting to go strong. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. The other thing I think we still need to see, and we haven't seen yet, is that reorganization, that taking a real hard look at the way we do business within this town, and making those hard choices to, take down some of those fiefdoms a little bit, and consolidate, regionalize. At least get out there and say, we've done everything we can do, and then go back to the voters and say, we can't do anything else. And I think that's where we have to be, and I'm not sure we're there yet.
Yeah, Jonathan? Okay. Yeah.
Quick question, Ted. You anticipate growth, and clear, I mean, I can see it happening in town. Are the assumptions that you're speaking to with respect to growth, are those incorporated in the 5-year plan, in the revenue side?
Some of them were, some not. So I don't think Casey Farm is. I don't think an assisted living facility, which, keeps coming up, and I think eventually is going to happen here someplace, and that will be a taxable on the tax rolls. So I don't think we factored in a tremendous amount, and I mean, should let the committee speak to that as opposed to me, but I don't think that the kind of growth that I was just talking about was necessarily factored in.
Thank you.
Let me come to Ted first. He had his hand up, sorry.
Tom, you mentioned a lot of possibilities for revenue growth, and you discuss the essential things we have to do. It's almost as if you're making a case that we aren't going to need an override.
I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't.
And
I mean, I don't want an override just for the sake of having an override, let's put it that way. If the revenue's there, then no, you don't need an override, but,
Okay.
but you look at your needs and
revenue growth that comes along with this kind of development often brings attendant costs, like school enrollment.
It can.
The kids who come in. So I think we need to look at the flip side of the revenue growth as well, if it's based on that. The other thing I gotta say, it's a little pet peeve of mine, but this sort of these B school buzzwords of reorganization, regionalization, consolidation. Have you had the town government study committee look at any of these things for actually quantifying how much any of these things could possibly save the town? I think a lot of them would be smart to do if there's an opportunity, but I think in terms of cost impact, they're probably not huge.
Even if they didn't save,
Okay.
even if they didn't save a lot of money, what they would do is they would reorganize and perhaps make up for those positions that we're saying we need now, that you could potentially.
But I would really like to see a study done on that, because I'm not convinced. I think probably everybody in this town is working pretty hard.
Anne Marie has spent quite a bit of time
Good.
going through it. And just the simple thing of taking a look at town hall and the way it's organized right now, and how all the different departments that handle money and handle transactions are all disaggregated, as opposed to having one central place where transactions could happen.
That makes sense, but that doesn't necessarily mean there is less work to do. Okay, even if it's being done in a more coordinated and cohesive way.
Do it smarter, and you'll do it with fewer people.
We'll see.
Bill? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Michael first.
I just I was trying to get more quantification about this, the fiefdoms. I don't watch, unlike Betty, I don't watch all the meetings in town. This is the only one I go to.
That's probably not the best word to say. That probably is not the best word to say, because
Principalities.
those other boards serve a very useful role in the town. The problem of having, and we've said it over and over again, 3 different departments cutting lawns within 50 feet of one another, that kind of thing. Is it necessary? Can there be a sharing of equipment better? Can there be a sharing of manpower better? And they can be. I mean, we all know there can be. And because of the way we're disaggregated, it makes it more difficult.
So it's the money handling and the lawn cutting. That's the takeaway.
It's a lot of everything. I mean, I can envision, and I think the town school consolidation committee has come up with a lot of good ideas so far. I think it's going to come up with more. And every time you get a little step closer, to perhaps at one day, a few years from now, maybe having one, that CFO model with just one system controlling both the school finance and the town finance. Do we need separate finance
I don't know that we do, and I don't know that we need 3 departments cutting lawns, and your points are well taken, but Ted's is as well, that I don't know that you're going to get the type of savings that you need with those initiatives. And we narrowly avoided a very big override this year with stormwater and some surprises in February. And so I think that the town needs to be on notice that we are likely to need an operational override soon. And I just don't want to walk away from your comments here with people thinking, oh, well, if we reorganize some departments, we're going to save that couple of $1 million.
You're not going to save a couple $1 million by reorganizing. We all know that. But you can get more efficient, and you should. And
you should do
whether
it.
it's $1,000 or $100,000 or $200,000, it's something that should be done.
Okay.
It's going to make you a more efficient town government.
All right, I have Phil and then Darnell.
No, Tom, I think you know that I agree with you on the consolidation issues and around the town. And I agree with your last statement that it's probably representative more of a few $100,000 savings. But in your initial statements, you tended to indicate that who knows? We may not need an override next year because of these savings. I don't think you really.
Well, no,
There's
that's
a growth.
no, not from the consolidation.
Yeah.
But from the
think
kind of revenue growth we may be talking about over the next couple of years, maybe, I don't
It
know.
could begin to make a dent, and it might extend, if we have an override next year, the next override might be extended a year or two down the
Sure,
road. But
possible.
it's not gonna make that difference in a year. I mean, because what we've heard from the selectmen is that you find that the items that were contained in the $2.8 million scenario were all important and necessary items.
Absolutely.
So, if we begin with that as a base, and then we add what may deteriorate in another year, we're looking at more than that as a potential override number. And the amount that might be decreased by consolidation and regionalization and privatization and whatever else we might do is not gonna be a great amount of money between now and a year from today.
That won't be. That won't be. And I don't even know that'll get accomplished between now and a year from today. And
Working
some of
on
it
it.
might. Some of it might. It's baby steps.
Yeah.
I think what remains to be seen is revenue growth and where it goes. And I think, if anything, that's what's going to help a little bit. And we all know that, we have a functional deficit. I mean, a structural deficit that, revenue growth just doesn't keep pace with expenditure growth. But, next couple of years, it potentially could get closer. Who knows?
I thought that was helpful, Phil. Thanks. Darnell?
This is why I started this whole thing out with this big soliloquy about why the Warrant Committee has to stand up even if it didn't pass. Is because our selectmen, you gave us long-term income when we have horrible short-term cash shortfalls. So all the things that you mentioned are no less than probably 4 or 5 years away.
That's not true.
That's
not true at all.
Okay, so we're gonna go, and I'm gonna use the ones you use because I don't think there's enough money in that pot, but I'll just use those. If we talk about regional consolidation, how soon?
I'm talking about new growth.
No. We're talking both because that what you brought up was
And I
as
just,
one
I
example.
just
wanna
told
just
you,
use it.
we have to move towards that.
Right, but I mean,
And
best
we
case
have to be able to
scenario,
put
how many
that,
years?
we have to be able to put that forth to the voters, that
Yeah, I'm saying
we're
best-
trying everything we can do.
I'll say best case scenario though. Everything comes up roses. Best case scenario, trying to work an agreement in a year that might take place. 19?
In
I'm
terms
also
of
skeptical
consolidation,
about Henry's getting done,
No, I'm not what. Henry's, you break bricks today, we solve all the problems with Henry's. That's not up for what? 19 maybe again?
year and a half, probably 2 years.
Close to 19 when we really can,
18.
yeah, when we can see anything from it. That's perfect scenario.
You're gonna see,
This year-
next year, you're gonna see the 37 units at St. Pius.
Okay, and that's gonna give us how big of a bump on what we have in the problem.
It's pretty good growth. It's pretty, it's
Yeah,
big,
but
it's
the
bigger
damn
growth
pro-
than we've seen.
And you know what's going to kill that? And that's why I'm trying to bring reality. You know what's going to kill that? What's going to kill that is the school's going to have sped increases that are just going to blow that away because we can't control those. And it's not the school's fault. It's just reality in life. What's going to happen, again, so kill a lot of that information, is stuff that we have no control over here in the town that sucks up those
I
dollars.
mean, we can
We're gonna
sit
have
here,
a-
we can sit here and talk doom
No,
and
no,
gloom
but
the
no,
whole day
no,
long,
it's not
and
doom and gloom. See,
yeah, well, some of it is,
it's
some of
not.
it's speculation, just the same way I was
No, no,
speculating.
no,
Yes, it is. It is speculation. It's, you don't know what sped costs are gonna be any more than I know what new growth is gonna be next year. So let's,
No, no, I'm
kind of
not-
calm
no,
down
no,
a
no,
little bit.
No, it's not calming down. It's what I'm saying is that we're constantly running into these situations where we're giving the towns like, oh, guys, you know what? When you say it's going to be 2-3 years away from
I'm just
looking at an
saying,
override.
I'm just saying, let's do everything we can do.
The reality is, it
Let's-
should have been done.
Let's
this year.
let's do the things that we can do and see where we stand. That's all.
We're already doing
Because
it.
we
Some of them,
we are.
yeah,
and-
we're
and-
trying, we're trying.
Don't talk over each other,
No,
guys.
we're trying, we're trying.
Guys, don't talk over each other.
In these town departments.
Darnell, I need you to wrap up.
I am. And these town departments are busting hump to try to make it with what we're giving them every year. And to say, oh, we can find this miracle savings out there, it just,
And you misunderstood. I didn't say it was a
No, it's-
miracle savings. I never said it was a miracle savings. I just said we had to do those things. And we gotta move towards those things. We gotta move towards them as quickly as we can. We've gotta implement the master plan implementation committee has to come in and start doing its thing. We have to set the stage for change in
and
the
I
town.
agree. I love that, the picture, but right now I'm saying the reality is that it's not coming
But
fast
those
enough.
are the things that are gonna help
It's not
sell
coming fast
an
enough.
override. If you're doing all those things and people can see that you're doing all
We
those
are.
things,
We're doing a lot of those things now. We're implementing the stuff as fast as we can. The people throughout this town are busting the boards are busting their hump to try to make these things happen now. It's not like, well, we're gonna ramp this up to get it going. They're doing these things now.
Guys, I think
And that's
I
what
think
the
we
problem is.
firmly
We're acting like
understand
it's not happening. It's
both of your
happening now.
positions. Darnell, we get it. we firmly understand that. I just don't see the conversation moving us forward at this point.
You can go ahead now.
Ted.
Just like,
Okay, I just got one thing to say. In terms of reorganization, I just want to recognize the efforts that Anne Marie has put in terms of the reorganization of the central office and along with Amy, and I think that's been a great step in the direction you're talking about. How much more can be accomplished in short order, I'm not sure. As far as growth goes, we just recognized huge growth. So if we can maintain that, we're already relying upon it. In order for this to have a huge impact on going forward, it has to go up again as opposed to just maintaining.
Even huger.
So, right. So, I mean, this is great, this is healthy, but it may only maintain where we are as opposed to providing yet another leap forward. Don't know.
I can see 17 and 18 grow, well, 18 and 19
We'll
growth
see.
being.
We'll see.
Being-
Anyway, I think I'd like to make a motion that the warrant committee agree to focus on the non-contingent budget and abandon the contingent budget.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? 8. All those opposed? 1. Nobody is standing. All right. That gives us some new direction for tonight.
Chairman?
Darnell, thank you for your comments. Yes,
Before we
Phil?
go off this, I'd like to reiterate a comment I made. Each year at the annual town meeting, this board makes a financial presentation to the town meeting. I would strongly suggest that a major component of that presentation this year go through the items that we felt were originally necessary for an override, so that the town meeting, at least, and those viewers who view that meeting, understand what the components of that were and understand the effects of not having that money. Because there are detriments to service, there are deterioration of roads, and they need to understand that. And then we can go from there into the presentation. But that is this committee's introduction to next year's override.
Yep.
And we don't need to wait to September, we need to start talking about it now as a committee.
Yeah, I agree.
Noted. Is there anybody else who wanted to say anything from the audience at this point before we start talking about the non-contingent budget? Well, this will make putting the warrant together a teeny bit easier, but not much. You don't have to add that fourth column now, Julia. Good news. What I was proposing to do on the non-contingent budget was work with Julia on getting the warrant to a place by next Monday where I can throw the articles up on the board that show the funding, and we could go through each article and vote them one at a time. Because I don't think that there's anything highly controversial in any of the non-contingent budgets that were presented to us by the department heads. We are going to go through the articles, but if folks have specific budgets they want to call up right now and start talking about them, I'm willing to do that, and I think we should do that. There were a couple of holes that we identified along the way here, including overtime in a non-contingent budget at the fire department, the full-day kindergarten issue, and a couple of others. So those are on my list of things to talk about with you before Julia and I go and try to put that spreadsheet together and the warrant together to vote starting hopefully Wednesday and then finishing up on Monday. But I wanted to get the pleasure of the group. If you feel like we need to reopen audit and every single one of these budgets and go through and look at the non-contingent stuff again. We have looked at them all once, but if you think we need to do that and have a discussion on each one, I want to hear. Chuck?
I mean, I think we talked about the full-day kindergarten, but I think it would be silly not to try to make that happen. I do think we need to address firefighter overtime by at least $75,000, because that's what we voted last week. I don't know if we could look at, I know in law we increased that some with one-time money and some with operational. Maybe we could make that with more one-time money, and then take the savings there and put that towards overtime for the firefighters.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was something that I had
General
discussed. Yeah.
And then, I mean, there's just two. I know everyone has been very disciplined about not using free cash for, and I think that's admirable, for operational, but I mean, I have some reservations about once something goes to free cash, it can never go to an operating budget to begin with, one. Two, going cold turkey, it's hard to go cold turkey. So if we slip a little bit, 50, 75,000 to get full day kindergarten and to get overtime for the fire department, I think that's okay. And I don't think that's the end of the world. To go from over $500,000 to under 100 is okay. So those are my. Law was the first place that I was thinking of in budgets that we could maybe claw some from, but if we have to use free cash, I think that's okay, as long as it's not too much.
Yep, these are the types of things that I want to get your opinion on tonight so that I can try to put the numbers together for you in a way that you want to see them for voting. Let me go through this little list here, and then I'll get some feedback from folks. And Anne Marie, if you wouldn't mind joining us at the table, Ted has a question for you. And I have a question for you. I just want to get a quantification. But the list includes, we just recently got a budget from the planning department, unfortunately, which was submitted very late. And it had a contingent budget request, which we're not going to try to meet because we're not working on contingent budgets now. And it had a non-contingent budget request. The non-contingent budget request that was new from last year, which isn't exactly what we asked them to do, but it included a $15,000 request for zoning codification. So that would be to hire a firm to come in and rewrite our bylaws once and for all so that they were correct and we weren't making mistakes like the one we just had to fix and the one that we're going to have to fix tonight or Wednesday, and that we had, that done. The question from the planning department was, could we fund that $15,000 with free cash? So we need to talk about that. Then, as we discussed earlier, we have about $50,000 coming from a Blue Hills savings, and maybe we can put that $50,000 towards the operating funding for full-day kindergarten, which would be our contribution, and the schools would come up with their $25K.
100.
They would come up with their energy savings of approximately $75K, and then the rest in reallocation from their existing budget. Then there's the matter of fire overtime and what we can send to that non-contingent budget, or what we want to send to that non-contingent budget. There will be some townside energy savings that I want to pull up that we can talk about that will be somewhat difficult for us to figure out, because we would have to go through a bunch of DPW budgets, we'd have to go through a library budget, we'd have to go through all sorts of weird places and try to back out 11% savings or something to try to come up with a bigger number to send to the fire department. But that's doable, and it's something that I'd rather do outside this room if you give me permission to go ahead and try to do that than try to work through that in this room. But there would be some money savings there that we could send to the fire department. And also there's about $4,000 in operating, in overlay reserve that was released. That is technically within the band that we usually use for operating funding. So that's $4K that we could send to the fire department if that's where folks wanted to send it. Another line item that we need to discuss tonight is we have $60,000 in that overlay reserve that's really technically one-time funds. So as Ted mentioned at previous meetings, there's an expected amount that's released from the overlay reserve every single year. That expected amount can
Average.
that average amount can be fed back into the operating budget because we can consider it reliable, reoccurring revenue. But anything above and beyond that, we really should consider as one-time funding, because we don't know if we're going to get it. We don't even know if we'll get the average, but we're kind of trying to split the difference there. This year, we had a big year, and we have about $60,000 more in overlay reserve that is going to feed into our one-time funds that we can allocate somewhere. To your point about maybe redirecting it to law, I thought of that myself, and I think that's a good point. We could move some of the operating expense increase out of law, replace it with one-time funds, see where it goes with the aviation, and beef up what we want to beef up. Maybe it's fire overtime. And now Ted has a question for Anne Marie on general insurance that I'm going to let him articulate.
Okay. I was thinking about,
Good evening, Anne Marie. Sorry.
So, I was thinking a lot about overtime for the fire department in a real situation, as opposed to the fast vanishing override budget. And I was thinking, my gosh, there aren't any non-contingent funds available from any budgets because they're all flat funded. And then I thought, okay, wait a minute. General insurance went up 50 grand. And it does have a healthy encumbrance on it that is understandably the insurance policy for the general insurance. How would you feel about reducing the general insurance increase and holding that flat?
Well, I think if you remember when I was here to talk about the general insurance budget, the reason it went up approximately $50,000 was because of the audit and the new way that the audit was being performed, and some of the positions that were, the way they were classifying them in the past were not correct. And so the result of them reclassifying positions resulted in $49,000 increase in this past year's audit. So that's why we had bumped up the general insurance budget.
But because of the encumbrance, you have the money available to spend.
Yes, and I do. And that encumbrance is usually held there for lawsuits that aren't covered by the town's insurance. And so I can take a look at that. And I'll get you an answer before Wednesday.
Well, if it freed anything up, then that might be useful.
Yes, let me take a look at it. It's a really good suggestion, but that is the reason why it did go up to 50,000 was
Right,
because of
and
the.
I'm glad you reminded us
Yep.
of the exact
The
reason.
workers' comp
but-
audit.
Yeah,
But I
nice.
did identify, because we also have savings on the town side with the new energy contract, and I did have Bill Ritchie, and thank you to Bill Ritchie, he did calculate some savings on the town side. And I did identify approximately $30,000 that I would like to suggest that we take out of the DPW's budget for streetlights, and we move that $30,870 to the fire department's overtime line. They did increase in, originally when we were creating the budgets, compiling them in the fall, we were told to put a certain percentage on them by our consolidated facilities director. But now that we have locked into that new energy contract, in the DPW budget, he expended $151,000 in fiscal year 15. In fiscal year 16 for the streetlights, he had an appropriation of $150,000. In fiscal year 17, he is looking for $180,000. So I think we can take that $30,000 and we can move that over to the fire department.
Okay. Do you have any others there that you've?
There's some smaller,
Do you have the library by any chance?
I
That
do
was
have the
biggest
library.
one that I saw.
It's 15,991. And I apologize, I can get this to you tomorrow. I was out of the office today, so I got here late tonight, so I didn't have a chance. But I did work on this
So it's 45
over
between
the
those
weekend.
two.
Yes.
Between,
Library and streetlights.
The library, they also had increased in, the library in fiscal year 15 expended $86,888 in their electricity and their heating and gas. And they're looking for, in the non-contingent for 17, $109,000.
What is your concern, Ted?
so how does this work? You speak for Joe. DPW, and he wouldn't have a problem with losing this out of his budget. I think the library might have an issue.
Well, I'm just telling you where I'm identifying the savings from the energy contract. I'm not telling you to
Right.
take the libraries. I only told you to take the $30,000 from the DPW. I would not.
I did bring up
And
the
that's one of
library.
those separate departments that are not under my jurisdiction, so I would never say take it. But I'm just identifying that there's
Yeah.
money there for you to look at.
Okay. Yes, Phil?
Is that it? My understanding is that over 2 years, the town is gonna save about $124,000.
Yes, but it's only
how much
half
of
of the
this-
year for, fiscal year 17,
So
so it's
what's
a
the
little over
total for-
30,000.
30,000.
Yes.
So it's natural gas for fiscal year 17 will be about $3,700, and for electricity, it'll be $27,000 for a total of $30,000. And Anne Marie has found, sounds like 30,000 of the 30,000. I don't know how that's going to work out.
Yeah. I took it out of the streetlights because they had increased to 30,000.
But if our total savings for fiscal year 17 was
I think
only-
that's just my departments. I can check with Bill
Oh,
tomorrow.
that's
I'm not
just
sure if
town
that
utility.
includes the
The
library or
library's not
not.
in
I
there.
just asked him to do a calculation on my departments,
Okay.
so I can check tomorrow. Again, I was out of the office today,
Yep.
so I didn't have a chance to.
So the police pay their own
Yes.
electric bill?
Yes.
Should I look that up? Or do you have that?
I have 4,500.
In savings?
From what their fiscal 15 actual was, what their 16 appropriation, and their fiscal 17 non-contingent appropriation request.
So,
So the police department expended in fiscal 15, 43,560, electricity and heat and gas, and he requested 51,000 in non-contingent for 17.
and the expectation is that it's gonna go down from the 43, right?
That was fiscal 15, no. You're
That was-
talking
that was-
fiscal, those actuals are fiscal 15 numbers, Ted.
Right.
So it's not fiscal 16 numbers.
So fiscal 16 numbers, he's predicting, I mean,
We know the
the
appropriation.
appropriation for 16.
The appropriation for 16 is 54,000.
And then and he was only asking for 51?
Yep, and the non-contingent.
Oh,
She was expecting it to go down, maybe?
the rest of us were expecting it to go up. I don't know, he must have a crystal ball. Interesting, okay.
Okay. So there are some savings to be had. Again, I'd like some directional correctness. I heard from Chuck that he'd like to try to find 75,000 to put into the fire overtime in a non-contingent scenario. I don't think that'll be easy to do, but 30 sounds like it'll be pretty easy. Maybe somewhere between 30 and 75. But I want to know from the committee that that is the direction we want to go in before we do that. So,
I'd like to clarify what the savings is for the schools on the half year next year on electricity.
it's we can bring Glenn up. I was told it is $75,000, but
Yeah, I don't understand the number,
Yeah.
given what their savings is over 2 years.
Hello. The breakdown for the schools over the 2 years is approximately $280,000. I don't have the breakdown, electricity and gas, but in the aggregate, it's about $280,000 over the 2 years. And again, quarter of that would be realized in fiscal 17, half in fiscal 18, and a quarter in fiscal 19 because of the calendar year lock-in for the 2 years that actually crosses 3 years. So you're looking at about 70.
2 years, it's 3 years.
No, it's a half of 17.
It's on 3 fiscal years, but it's 2 calendar years. And so 70 is roughly the realized savings in fiscal 17, and we had anticipated an increase, so 75 is doable.
So that's going to go toward the kindergarten.
The school committee's finance subcommittee met this morning and talked about it. They haven't voted anything yet. We're bringing it before the full school committee on Wednesday night. But it certainly could be used for that. I won't, not sitting on the committee anymore, I certainly won't speak as to how they will vote, but it is certainly capable of being put to
before we
that.
continue the discussion on fire overtime or not, I do have a question for Jack, if you don't mind popping up to the table. I had a question posed to me by another citizen who asked, if we're talking about, I think I know the answer, but in the spirit of full disclosure, if we're talking about $400,000 in fire overtime or some number even higher than that, why wouldn't we just hire 5-ish, 6, who knows, how many firefighters to beef up the staff and then hopefully not need that overtime anymore? Why wouldn't we want more full-time employees?
Right. I'm sure there's a number out there that brings those together. It's quite honestly, it's above my pay grade. It's a matter of all the fringe benefits you pay over and above the salary, and the pension liability over and above the salary. At one point in time, way before my time, but in my father's time, we were either 70 or 72 members on the department. And interestingly enough, there was 2 studies done, widely separated in time. I know one of them was 1961, and I think the other was, I was on the job at that point. And both of them said that the department should be staffed at 80 people. So when you look at that, you can see how considerably understaffed we actually are. However, we are, again, I've thrown the term out over this whole period of time. I call it ground zero. If you guys cut us from where we are, we're really in trouble. But if we can find a way to leave us where we are, we don't do it perfect, but we do a pretty good job of getting the job done. There's many times there's...
I mean, in terms of staffing, not overtime.
In terms of staff, yeah, no, definitely not in overtime. But, so I think what I'm getting at is, I don't know if we're at the best balance, but it's a balance. There's, if we hired, say, one more person per group, I don't know that puts us that far away from the minimum manning that you see, substantial savings. Emery and I talked about this at some point last week, where during my 7 years, I can only swear to one, and there might have been a second, where I didn't get beat up pretty good with injury and illness. It really, the work we do does, it beats you up, and as I said the other night, it's one of those things where if you are injured, whether it be on the job or off the job, you can't perform the job. So we lose that body for longer than, again, I'll use myself as an example because my job description is a little bit different. My back hasn't been normal since October for whatever reason. I just can't, it's probably age, but I can't get it back to where it should be. But I'm able to come to work doing what I do. The guys on the engines just can't do that. So.
All right,
Can I
yeah,
ask
Jean?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Have you ever developed a model for the cost of a fireman? An average salary with an average training, with an average overtime, with an average, whatever it takes to put that to put that fireman on the scene? Have you ever developed a model of what that costs?
Not completely, no. We have had discussions, as to what those, the benefits add to the picture over and
Sure.
above the salary.
Sure.
The overtime question's really hard because it is so variable. Somebody at one point at the table here had suggested I think it was 2 years ago now, wanted me to, to track it to find out where the overtime was coming from. And they even emailed me a format. And when I looked at the format, certain towns flashed in front of me. Because there are towns, like I said, we're running on, if healthy, 3 of our groups are staffed at 14. One of them's staffed at 13. We have to hire overtime at 11. There are cities and towns that hire man for man. So if they're 14, the minute one person goes out, they hire one. And I could see that chart was geared towards telling you where the overtime came from in that situation. In ours, it's a combination of all factors. So
it's very hard to compare.
It is.
If we wanted to dismiss the 400,000, it's impossible really to say how many.
I don't know that it's impossible, but I don't think it's going to be cost effective to hire enough people to make that go. At that 72, and I was thinking about this the other day, at 72, I think it puts us around 18 people per group. It gives you a 6-man leeway till, well, I should qualify that. At the time, they were running a second ladder truck, so their minimum manning then was 12 rather than 11. So they had a 6-person cushion. And my understanding of it is there was actually very little overtime back then. But, the cost of, adding a dozen people is going to be far more than $400,000.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that, I think the balance point, honestly, I think we're doing okay. As much as that's, and it's probably more toward 450 than 400 by the time we get to the end of this year. As much as that seems distasteful, I think that's the economical way to be.
Betty?
Can you tell us, Jack, what the actual cost is if you added in the package of benefits to a starting salary for, let's say, a new firefighter? And I know they have to go to the academy and they're not available to actually be at the fire station until they've done their training. But what's a typical starting salary for a new firefighter once he or she has done the academy, adding in the benefit package? Do you know what the dollar figure would be approximately?
I don't even know off the top of my head what the starting dollar figure is, just salary-wise right now, but I can get that for you before your next meeting.
Because I would imagine it's in if you think about the package, the benefit package and the cost of like a family health insurance if they take that. What do you think?
To the base pay, you add about 39%
Okay.
for all benefits.
So if you think about how many firefighters that $400,000 figure
Well, if you added 5 firefighters, you're talking almost $100,000 if they all take the family plan for insurance.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is consider that, there's 4 working groups. So if you're adding to each group, you gotta, take that number we're looking to go up and multiply it by 4. So it's not as simple, it's never as simple as hiring 1, you're hiring 4 for 1 to make it go across the board.
I wanted to make sure we asked the question. Ted, are you winding up a question? See your hand in the air, you got your pen in your mouth.
I just want to make an observation, that I failed to make the other night, which is really that anytime anybody's cost goes up more than 3%, we've got to look at it because our revenue is only going up 3%. So, when you have a request for the overtime going from 300 to 400, it's like dropping a piano on us. It's a stunner.
Yeah, oh, no, believe me, I get that. And
We get that.
knowing this collective bargaining settlement was coming, I knew the piano was coming.
Right, but even so, I mean, the collective bargaining settlement would indicate maybe a 10% increase in the support, but it speaks to what Darnell has said about the way many of these budgets have been stressed, because instead of each line being properly sort of dedicated and expended, you're borrowing from Peter to pay the overtime Paul.
Yeah, no, you're dead on.
And now all of a sudden you can't do that, and you're presenting us with these 150 over 300, that was a 50%.
Yeah, well, to
50%.
to look at that a little bit differently as well, pretty much since I've been in the office again, we've been dealing with either, level dollar or level service. And I noticed, we were coming to this point probably 5 years ago. And, I've thrown it out at the table here. The day is coming, the day is coming, the day's here. It did. It finally, with that 3-year settlement, it took you from, and I've been to see you guys for reserve fund transfers,
Right,
at
no.
least 2 out of the last 3 years, so we knew we were getting there.
And it's an accumulation, but it is still a shock to the system.
Yeah.
And trying to, fund that type of increase is...
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I'll say the reason I push so hard to maintain it is because we have, again, I'll throw that ground zero term out there. I will not sleep good at night if we're not putting, 3 fire engines and 1 ladder truck on the street. And we've been in this position since realistically just after I came on the job. I saw us go from 56 to 52. We've creeped back to 56. We've been holding our head above water very slightly for a long, long time.
So help me out, what do you mean 56 to 62?
56 to 52. We saw a cut down to 52. We never did change the manpower, so we always ran at 11. But during Malcolm's time, he was able to say, look, I think we will lower the overtime if we hire 4 more guys. So, that's how we got back to the 56.
Okay.
All right, so again, I'm looking for some direction from the Warrant Committee. We voted the other night to put $75,000 into a budget that was going to be contingent, $75,000, that we knew may or may not go forward. But as you heard, I could go looking for some energy savings in some various budgets, which may or may not require a lot of discussion with other departments. But at least in the DPW, there's $30,000. Anne Marie's going to look into some general insurance savings. There's a couple of other smaller ideas out there. Yep.
The other one is the overlay surplus.
Yeah.
It went up by 61,000.
It's one-time
Now,
funds.
I know that's one-time funds, but I was wondering if you may want to think about maybe putting that 61 into and increasing the reserve fund for 17 from 200,000 to 261,000. And there, if Jack needs, if the stress on his budget, there's a little bit higher of a reserve fund there to do that with. Just a suggestion, throwing it
I
out.
like
You know,
that
can I,
idea.
can I push back on that a little bit, though? I mean, we were kind of warned very, I'm sorry if I'm
Go ahead.
recognized. We're warned pretty strenuously that that would be a bad idea, because now we know that the overtime is coming and we can't do a reserve fund transfer. So I have no problem putting a little free cash into the
But you-
line.
right, but you're not
So I just,
You're not gonna be able to fund the whole thing. There's just not enough money in the non-contingent budget. You're absolutely correct. We did tell you the 5-year average for overtime. You're absolutely correct. But I'm trying to find some creative ways to.
So the idea there would not be to fund the overtime with the reserve funds, but to have it as a buffer in case.
I know what it is, I'm a little uncomfortable with that after the discussion that happened earlier in the week.
Yeah. I think the only other alternative, though, would be to use one-time funds
But
to
I think-
bolster
I think
an
this-
operating.
What's wrong with that? I mean, I know it's not, I know,
Well, you
I
could
know
do
it's-
that as well. You could put it in the non-contingent as one-time funds for 17, knowing that we are going to all get on the bandwagon in March for 18 for the override. So you could do that if, you could consider it one-time money. It's your call. I'm just
We
throwing it
could.
out there.
we could.
Phil?
Just giving you some creative
Mr. Chairman,
ideas.
I'd prefer to hear what the total savings are
Yeah.
on energy,
Yeah.
and have this committee sit and say, these are the additional funds, these are the things that we could spend them on, how do we want to allocate it? Rather than jumping in and voting on any one right now. We're not going to hear from the school committee until Wednesday night about whether they're going to find an additional $25,000 to fund all-day kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And that will affect our vote not only on how we would use the available funds, but on what we might do with $900,000 in free cash.
Yeah.
So I think all these things are related. There's only 4 or 5 elements, but I'd like to know all the data so that we can make an intelligent decision.
I would too.
Yeah, I wasn't
agree.
looking for
Is that
a
a
vote
motion?
tonight. I'm just making some suggestions.
No, you know what I wanted? I wanted some direction from the warrant committee that said, yes, we're interested in funding some additional overtime in the non-contingent budget. Go get us this information, that sort of thing. And then I was going to bring it back to you. I wasn't looking for the exact number. I was looking to test the temperature of the group before I went and did kind of a strenuous exercise. But I do intend to bring that number back, and I just want to point out the schedule that we have between now and when we need to get the warrant to print. I might need an additional meeting or two beyond just the Monday, Wednesday deal. Because we're coming up against, I had asked the selectmen to hold some time on their calendars to review some warrant language. I don't know that I'm going to be able to make that schedule anymore. I might need to move that out a little bit with what we're doing. So anyway, I'm keeping an eye on that deadline, and we need to stay on track. Ted?
I've got two quick
Yep.
questions. In the law budget, we really need to address your law budget at
Yeah.
some point, okay? And that could be a long call. The other question I have is my understanding was electricity was going to be 400,000 townwide, okay? Glenn is now giving us a figure of 280 from the schools, but that also includes natural gas, okay? So I'm wondering if you are privy to the entire number of representing savings, town and school, both electricity and fuel.
You mean the email that you sent me?
I sent the spreadsheet.
I didn't get a spreadsheet. What I just got was that summary email, and earlier tonight you said you thought it maybe just had the selectmen departments on it.
I thought I sent them this one.
So, from what the email that Bill sent us, it said for school department, electricity savings over 2 years is 172,780, and natural gas savings over 2 years is 119,990. So you're looking at 292 for the schools over the 2 years between electricity and gas. And the town department Bill's numbers were 108,320 for electricity and 15,100 for natural gas. The schools use the bulk of the natural gas because our schools are heated with natural gas. Most of the other buildings in town are not. So the town side was 123,000. So it's roughly, it's a little more than 2/3 of the savings goes to the schools, 290 versus 120 or
So if 123 is the total savings to the town over 2 years, and we can only access a quarter of that because it's a half a year, then 30,000 is about as far as we're gonna go, because that's a quarter.
Yeah.
That's correct, but what I was saying is some departments
Increase their budget,
increased
right?
their
Okay.
budgets in anticipation of an
Increased
increase.
cost, yeah.
And that's where I'm gonna clean this sheet up
Okay.
and
Okay.
send it to
Great,
Michael
thank you for
tomorrow.
that.
That'd be
Thank you for
great.
that clarification. So,
Those numbers are on the screen if anybody wanted to
so
see them.
legal, and is Tom still here? Maybe he's, oh, great.
Can we put the law budget up? Do we have it?
It is, yeah. I got it here.
Just real quick before, and I'll hop out of the way and let Tom jump in here. As knowing we were gonna be, talking about this as to where to come up with money, I took a look this morning at both my FY16 and FY17 new equipment money. And, as I've told you guys year to year, I wait until the very end of the year to spend my new equipment money. So I took a look at what, between both years, that I feel like I can't do without between now and the end of the next fiscal year. And I was able to take 18,000 and say 56 of that, and I can push that off. So, there's just a little over 18,000 that I can toss toward overtime this year.
Oh, very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
It's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Up to 48.
It's creeping there. I'm just hoping to get within range of coming to see you guys next year around this time for a reserve fund transfer, because I will. Are you coming this year? I more than likely will be coming this year as well. I don't have any kind of figures yet, but we're looking tight, so we will start working on seeing if we can't put a number, there again.
241.
Hopefully I'll be a little more accurate this year because we appear to be getting healthy. One or two have come back now, and I'm expecting another one or two before the end of the month. So, I may know a little bit better than coming asking for 100 and, only spending 50 of it. But I will let you know as soon as I can put a finger on it.
Great, thanks,
Great.
Jack.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
What is the protocol for spending free cash?
On overtime?
Have you?
On anything.
On anything, yeah. What is
Okay.
it?
According to the Department of Revenue,
Yeah.
a healthy town will have approximately 2% of its budget in free cash each year. That free cash should not be used for a reoccurring expense because you can't count on the free
Exactly.
cash. And if you do, you're basically living paycheck to paycheck. There should be something left over at the end of the year that you're able to invest strategically and in other one-time things. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, what have we been doing
Okay.
over the
Last
5
year we
years?
spent a lot.
We have been doing.
Not that.
We have, okay, let's see. I'm not exactly sure what we did 3 years ago, but I don't think we used any free cash for direct operational support at all, okay? And we did start using it, we may have, 3 years ago, we may have paid a little sick leave buyback or something like that,
Yeah.
okay?
But well
Because those
within
are
the realm
one-time
of,
things.
well within the realm of.
2 years ago, we spent about $400,000 in direct operational support. Funded it with free cash. We got about 2 million. Last year, we got about 2.9 million. And we ended up spending 603,000 in direct operational support. That does not include the sick leave buyback of maybe, I don't know, another 53,000, something like that, that we spent on it last year. And this year, we're proposing to use free cash for sick leave buyback, and we can get into that page. You have it it hasn't changed much in any of the workbooks that we've sent out.
Okay.
It's under the one-time tag. You'll see there's a sick leave buyback for the Selectman's office, the Board of Health, the, I don't know, one other department, I think. Treasurers. And so, yes, we're funding that out of free cash because you never know when that's going to pop up.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
But
but we are not, at the moment, putting any free cash or surplus overlay reserve above the average toward any operating expenses.
Okay.
Okay, now, that doesn't mean we have a ton of free cash left over to play with, because the Capital Planning Improvement Committee came in and asked us for $758,000, right? Okay, and we would like to fund some things in the non-contingent budget with free cash. A little bit to this general stabilization, and about 153 to the thousand to the OPEB trust. So that we have a full slate to consider in the,
Yeah.
okay? But generally, you don't want to use your free cash if you don't have to. It's opportunity lost in terms of being able to fund small capital projects.
Okay, so to focus us back on law for a minute, right now in our free cash bucket, which we have not voted and we need to talk about, we're holding about $49,000 for law. It's just holding, it's not voted on yet. In addition to that, in the non-contingent budget, professional and special services has gone up from 197 to 284, so that's $87,000 increase.
Of which 40, they're
49,000.
proposing 49 would.
Okay,
Of that, 49,000 will come from free cash.
all right. Is that correctly represented on this spreadsheet, Ted, on the workbook? If I were to look at the general expense
Yes.
detail, and
Yeah.
it works out that way on the
Yeah.
bottom?
The formula is.
Okay.
Because we have put that amount of free cash into the revenue.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Revenue stream.
Yep, you're right.
That's how
Okay,
it's-
good.
it works.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm confused by that. How was it determined that 49 of that should be free cash?
By
It was
a
their-
request.
It was their non-contingent request.
And how was that number arrived at?
What we did was we did a 5-year look back in the law budget. It's approximately about $240,000 a year that we're spending on special services and professional services. So that's what, that 284 was just that.
It was to get
the
some-
ballpark
it was
of
to get
that number,
something in
and then
there.
something in there for the airplane mitigation. The Board of Selectmen felt strongly that they wanted to have some monies in the law budget to direct towards the airplane mitigation issues. in
We've
the
hired
town.
a consultant that is actually working, is being paid through the law firm, you know, our counsel. But she's an airplane noise consultant, and she will be doing undoubtedly some work during fiscal 17. So it's to get something in there to cover some of that cost.
So the question that was raised earlier, if there's an $89,000 increase in this budget, in the law budget. 49,000 of it is already earmarked for the one-time funds, and we know that we're going to have a little bit of room in there, maybe a $60,000 bandwidth in the one-time funds because of the overlay. Could we move the other 40,000 into one-time funds and give it a year and see how those expenses evolve? And if we need to, you know, if we need to shore up the law budget in the future permanently, then we look at an operating line increase. But
Yeah, and what we've been doing in the past, and it's been something that probably 7 or 8 warrant committees ago started,
This is,
was to
yeah.
use a rolling base.
Yeah.
oh
This
yeah,
is one of those budgets that's unanticipated. We don't know what we're gonna spend from year to year. We don't know what the subject's matter is gonna be from year to year. And so historically, it has been, you know, an appropriation about, I think it's like 195, 197 the past few years. And then each year, you just fund the rest out of the reserve fund transfer account, reserve fund account, because again, it's a fluid budget. We don't know.
Well, what was happening though is as we were keeping, prior to that 6 or 7 years ago, the law budget was always static. It never went up.
Right.
And it was just putting more and more pressure on the reserve fund. And that's why the change was made to let's go with a rolling.
Kind of like fire department overtime,
Yeah.
putting pressure on them.
Yeah.
all right. Well, that's a possibility. And I'll pop back over to the law budget now. But $2,000 of the increase came in the retainer. We wouldn't not want to move that into, so we need probably a $2,000 operating increase here, regardless of what we
Yes.
do with that professional and special services line.
So if you wanted to make it level to fiscal 16, you would make that 195,000 in the special service line, because it was 197 last year.
We would make it 197, and we would keep.
195, because I moved 2,000 up to the retainer.
To
It's
make it
increased his
level dollar.
retainer. If you want to level
wanna
dollar
make it
it to
fungible.
16, you would then, in 16, the professional services was 197, and the retainer was 58. So
Yep.
if you want to keep it level, you're moving 2,000 from special services up to retainer, so you'd have to reduce that to 195.
Thank you. That's helpful. Okay.
So,
Spreadsheets. Yes, Ted?
so while we're talking about, I mean, we had Jack tell us that he might be in. Will you do a survey for us to see if we need supplemental funding for this year's reserve fund?
Yes, I will. I'll reach out to the department heads.
Because that would be a drag on the current free cash, too. The other question I have is, are we going to need to move forward from fiscal year current fiscal year to next fiscal year, $397,000 of reserve funding for Hendry's demolition?
We don't know.
When,
That's a yes.
We don't know.
Maybe, we
We're
hope not.
hopeful that,
We hope
hopeful
not.
that not,
We hope
yes.
not. We're hoping to have good news soon.
I mean, part of that was the town meeting article that was passed and,
oh, absolutely. Okay.
but
Yes, Phil?
Is it likely, is it possible we're gonna know on the eve of town meeting?
it really depends on how quickly things, there's a lot of moving parts to that right now that are gonna be moving. There's the DEP appeal, which.
Should be wrapping up within,
Yeah, which
hopefully the
they're
next
waiting
month.
to hear the results of that before they move forward with their next step. That next step would probably go into the planning board. We're hopeful of that, depending how quickly it gets to the planning board, and whether they hit any stumbling blocks in the planning board. And that's kind of where it's at, there's still just a lot of variables in that thing, but we're hopeful that it will free up.
Move forward.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we wanted to move most of this increase from professional services into one time for a year, it doesn't sound like either one of you would be really upset about that.
No,
If we were to
But
use
no-
that.
knowing that the year after that,
Yeah.
you really want to
You
get back
really
on the
want-
track
Yeah.
of the rolling
Yes.
base, that's
Yep.
all.
Okay. But I can see justifying it as one-time funds this year, which is why I'm focusing on it, because there's so many other things that I can't see as justifying as one-time funds. So I'm looking for reaching. All right.
And if it's helpful to you, I created this spreadsheet back, it goes way back to 1995. And I can send this to you as well, which shows what was appropriated each year and what was expended each year.
Okay. Thank you. Phil?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand what it means. If we fund the $87,000 for FAA experts out of one-time funds, and you say you want to get back on the rolling
No,
budget
no,
next
the-
year, what do you mean by getting
Only
back on the rolling budget?
49,000 of that is.
49,000 of
FAA.
No, that's not what the chairman just said. Chairman said all of it
No.
are one-time funds.
No.
Well, yes, he
Yes.
said all of it's
Yes,
one-time
that's
funds, but not all of it's
89,000.
FAA. Only 49,000, that's FAA. The rest is the 5-year rolling base.
Okay, so you're saying to us then that we should expect that next year you're going to at least have the 87 minus the 49 as a baseline in that line item?
Right, now the only thing that could change that is if the expenditures for FY16 come in lighter, then your rolling base all of a sudden is a little less.
The 5-year average is about 241,000. that we're spending on special and professional services in the law budget.
Right, so each year, 1 year drops off and the year comes in on that.
Was that been coming through as reserve fund transfers?
Yes, yes.
Every
That's
year?
how, every year, yes.
In June, at the tail end of the year, they finally get a bill for April and May, from the law firms. And then they go, whoops, we need 40 grand.
In fiscal year
Kind of
12,
thing.
we appropriated 83,000, we spent 217,000 on professional services. But then in 13, we appropriated 200,000, we only spent 185,000.
That includes
So
the
it
40.
fluctuates, again, depending on the issue in that current year. So historically, the way the warrant committee has treated this budget is it's appropriated less, and then because it's a fluid budget and you don't know, they've funded the rest of it through reserve fund at the end of the year.
You less enthusiastic about using
Well, I don't
one-time
know, I
funds?
don't
for-
know. If you come back to us next year and say, we spent the 49,000 of one-time money on FAA consultant. We think we got the FAA on their knees. We want
No.
another $100,000. You gonna ask for that as one-time money as well?
Probably
I think-
would, yes.
We're gonna go to
If we-
US Appeals Court and we're gonna fight this thing and
If that would
I think the
occur,
board
we
is
probably
committed.
would, yeah.
have you guys, has the committee discussed this publicly, this request for this money for the FAA fight?
When you say committee, the airplane.
Selectmen?
Yes.
Board of
Yes,
Selectmen.
Yes, when they
have,
approved this budget, they
Okay.
did, yes. They had a discussion. And in the non-contingent, actually, I didn't put anything, I just had it level dollar. And in the contingent, I put some money in. But the board felt so strongly and so
Yeah.
committed to this cause of airplane issues over our town that they wanted something in the non-contingent budget to show the residents of this town that they are trying to do something.
So I assume
And
that
it
means you're
takes
gonna speak
dollars
to it
to
at
do
town
that.
meeting? The need for it?
Yes, I suspect Katie probably will.
She looks a little surprised, but
You're only supposed to volunteer people who aren't here.
there's nobody on your committee you can vote on. All right, so good. Ted and I are going to get together and we're going to play with some energy budgets. We're going to play some law budgets. We're going to look at what Anne Marie sends us in terms of general insurance and what the department heads say in terms of one-time funds. And we're going to come back to the committee with some recommendations. I've heard generally from the committee tonight that it seems worthwhile to look into what funds we can redirect at fire department overtime in a non-contingent budget. We didn't vote it, but it seems like folks are generally in favor of that. I want to hear something like that in terms of the $50,000 that we're proposing for the school committee to firm up the free full-day kindergarten, because I want Glenn to be able to go to the school committee on Wednesday and say, yes, the warrant committee is going to send this 50,000 operating funds to you if you come up with the 100,000 between energy and other expenses. So tell me if I'm off base or somebody make a motion or whatever.
Well, first of all,
Gene.
were you including the 18,000 the chief thought that he could?
I switched topics there, and I'm talking about free full-day kindergarten now, and yes, that's good. So if we, I will factor in that 18,000
That's
on
all.
fire
That's
department.
all.
Yes.
You didn't bring it up, so.
Yeah, you're right.
okay.
You're right. It's one of those things in
Yeah.
the bucket that I need to add together on the
Yeah.
spreadsheet when we come back to. Yes, for sure. So on the topic of free full-day kindergarten, is the warrant committee committed, if we can find $50,000 in savings, say from Blue Hills, for instance, to moving that over to the operating budget for the schools for free full-day kindergarten? Ted?
So Blue Hills is coming in on Wednesday. I won't be here, but they're having their budget meeting tomorrow. We think their preliminary numbers will hold up, but they could surprise us. The preliminary numbers will give us a bonus compared to what we are expecting their budget to be of $49,966, whatever. And it, it makes good sense to me to use that if the schools can come up with 100 and put the 950 to use. I think that's a good step forward for the town. I'd like to see that happen. I don't know, if they don't, if the school committee thinks that's a step too far for them, that would be too bad, and we'll have to discuss what to do with the 950.
Chuck?
I agree. I won't be here Wednesday either. And again, I'm going to repeat myself. I think it's silly to let $1 million walk away for such small change. I think it's okay to spend free cash on this. So I'm all for it.
Darnell?
I think we should come up with 50, man. If, the school's coming up with 100. I was kind of biting the cheek when they was a little, really trying to be adamant on the, when we had our last meeting over at the schools, but if they can come up and find the 100, I think we should be able to come up and find the 50 to go with that, because again, we're already hurting, I think, our kids enough. So let's do something that's gonna really benefit the town.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good return. I can't imagine us not taking advantage of it.
Okay. Betty? We have no idea where you stand on the schools or free full-day kindergarten.
I support that.
Wish you'd put a flag in the ground at some point.
I think this is one of the most important things this town can do for the schools and for the entire town. So.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Phil?
I support it as well, but I'm more or less adamant that we provide the 50 and they find the 100.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair trade-off.
Thank you. Michael, Brian?
What he said.
Okay, Brian. Do you have what you need? Great. You're going to have a different mix of people on Wednesday or when we vote, but it seems like you have overwhelming support.
I won't be here either because I'll be
Okay. All right, great. So, in 1 minute. Again, there's overlay reserve funds. We could probably boost our reserve fund with that a little bit. We could maybe hold out $15K for the planning board request for zoning codification. We're going to hear from the planning board and Bill Clark on Wednesday to decide to inform our discussion of whether or not we think that that's a good use of one-time funds. So there's a lot for me to play with and put together in terms of putting it in a way that you can vote on it. Okay, Phil?
If you happen to get these numbers in time,
Yeah.
the available cash and the available opportunities to spend the cash, could you email those to us?
Yep.
That would be
We can look at
wonderful.
them, look at them before.
Yeah.
Yep. So you
Otherwise,
can
we'll-
digest them. Yeah, I'm thinking that we won't have this done in time for Wednesday night. We'll be able to have a lot more discussion on Wednesday, and we have the playground planners coming in, we have Blue Hills coming in, we have planning board coming in. So it's a little pie in the sky to think that we'd get to voting on budgets, but this will be our whole meeting next Monday. So I should be able to get you something to think about with a few days.
Great.
And then that means that the selectmen can take off their calendars next Tuesday, Wednesday that I asked you to reserve a couple of hours to look at the warrant. We're not going to be ready for that, unfortunately. Best laid plans. Chuck, did you have your hand up?
Motion to adjourn.
Oh,
1 second.
yes?
Can I, if we don't get another chance, to thank Anne Marie for her service and the time that she put in, and the miracles she's worked over the last couple of years to get this town through quite a few tough times and tough budget periods, and making it a little easier for this committee to do their job. Just wanna give her a shout.
This moves right into the
I
adjournment.
need a second.
Second.
All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you, folks.
Why sit back down?